Hello everyone, thank you for attending. I'm Aidin Azamnouri and my presentation is about compressing automatically generated unit test suites through test parameterization. Here you can see the outline of my presentation. Introduction, related work, proposed approach, evaluation, and conclusion. As it is known, unit testing is one of the most considerable test levels, both in academia and industry. To test an appropriate ratio of the software under test, a large number of unit tests are required. Furthermore, while the source code of the software under test is being evolved, unit tests need to be maintained. These factors contribute to increasing the cost and complexity of unit testing, which emphasize the need for automated techniques for unit test generation. Automated unit test generation has been an active field of research. Therefore, different techniques and approaches have been introduced through time. Now I'm going to talk about automated unit test generation. Automated unit test generation uses a predefined iterative algorithm, the main focus of which is achieving high level of test coverage. So less attention is paid to other important factors such as maintainability, readability, understandability, etc. Also, automated unit test generation generates a large number of tests within a short time budget. And the larger the test suite, the more challenging it is to read, understand, and maintain the tests. Another point to mention is that automated unit test generation has a naive naming schema for the test methods, for example, test 01, test 02. Therefore, understanding the test requires reading the body of a test method, which increases the cost of test maintenance. In addition, the body of test methods is usually very long, which reduces the readability and understandability and affects the maintainability. An interesting point in our first observation was that a high level of similarity between different test methods was found. For example, Randup, that is a well-known tool for automated testing, is very likely to generate similar unit tests because of its features like random sequences of method calls and new sequences generated by extending the previous sequences. In our proposal, we have proposed an automatic technique that factorizes the similarities in test suites, transforms similar tests to parameterized tests, makes it easier to read and understand the tests, and finally, we have implemented it as a plugin for IntelliJ IDEA. The next section that I'm going to talk about is some of the related works. And the first study was an investigation conducted on test case quality and what good test cases are. And it was done through interviewing a group of industrial practitioners. And one of its conclusions was for a test case to be good, it is necessary to be readable and understandable. The next paper was about studying the costs and importance of test maintenance, in which it was found that test maintenance can be incredibly costly and time-consuming. Thus, they emphasize the need for automated techniques. Another study was the comparative analysis of the readability of manually and automatically generated test cases. The results of which were that readability of the test cases is usually overlooked by developers, and automatically generated test cases are less readable than the manually written ones. The fourth paper introduced the idea of coverage goals to automatically generate descriptive names for test methods by determining the goals addressed by the test method, and this could improve developers' comprehension. In another paper, interviews and surveys were conducted to measure the way existing metrics reflect the perceived test case quality. And here you can see the results of this paper. First, code coverage is required, but is not sufficient. And second, readability and maintainability are two essential factors. The sixth paper, which was an empirical study, examined whether existing concrete unit tests could be retrofitted as a parameterized unit tests. And in this paper, they presented a semi-automatic methodology called test generalization. And the last study here is introducing a fully automated CUT-PUT retrofitting technique that is called output, that identified similar concrete unit tests as candidates to become parameterized, which can help to develop a reliable software by augmenting the maintainability of manually written test suites. Now let's talk about our work, whose focus is on automatically generated test suites. Compared to manually written test suites, we believe that they are more important and have more potential for getting parameterized. Here is the overall process of our proposed approach. As you can see, we have the initial test suites as the input, and the input is processed through 4 phases: pre-processing, test clone detection, test parameterization, and post-processing. And finally, we have the output, which is the final test suites that are parameterized. Here you can see the first phase. The purpose of this step is identifying flaky tests in the input test suite. And what is a flaky test? It is a test that its pass-fail result varies in different executions. The input test suite is executed multiple times for this reason. Any flaky behavior is flagged to be excluded from further processing due to the decision made based on the execution result of each test in another phase, and due to the non-deterministic behavior of these tests. And the second phase is test clone detection, which goal is finding the test methods by detecting identical statements and different parameter values. Therefore, a test clone detection component was developed that automatically identifies maximal test clone sets using static analysis. A maximal test clone set is a set which contains all of the similar test methods. This process is done by the help of abstract syntax tree, based on the only difference in the statements, which is literals, and the similarity in the same number of statements. Third phase is test parameterization, in which each maximal test clone set is processed. Then we create a test class with a single parameterized test method by using JUnit features like @sign theory and @sign data points. A theory method creates the same instructions of all methods and replaces all the literals with the index elements of a parameters array. And a data point just adds the corresponding data points, literals. For better understanding, here you can see an example of test clones generated by random. As it is shown, all of the statements are similar, except the ones including next prime method. One of them has 0 as an argument and the other one has 1. Now, it's obvious that these methods are capable of being parameterized. This slide shows the parameterized test of the previous test methods. Here we have separated the statements, logic, and literals. This factorized test has the same coverage as the previous test methods. And this is the last phase, which is called post-processing. The input is parameterized test methods generated in the previous step, which is compiled here, and if we have any errors, it will be rejected. Otherwise, it will be run. Again, if we have any errors, it will be rejected. Otherwise, we compare the coverage of the parameterized test suite with the original one. And if the coverage is decreased or if we see any degradation, it will be ignored. Otherwise, it will be chosen as the final result. Next section is evaluation. For the purpose of the experiments, we firstly prepared a dataset of automatically generated test suites by using random to generate unit tests for Java classes in 15 open source Apache Commons projects, the latest versions, such as collections, crypto, lang, imaging, and math. Then we selected randomly 50 regression test suites of each class. For the evaluation, we used 3 metrics. The first one was compression ratio, that is the percentage of the reduction in the size of the test suite after it is parameterized. The second one was applicability ratio, that is the percentage of tests in the test suite that are successfully converted to the parameterized format. And the last one was execution time, that is the time budget needed for the parameterization of a test suite generated for a single class under test. Here you can see the results of the evaluation with the help of these 3 metrics. The proposed technique has been able to provide an average compression ratio of 66%. For the sake of brevity, we only show the top 5 classes with the most compression ratio in the next slide. As the evaluation demonstrated that the highest compression ratio was 96%, the lowest compression ratio was 11%, and in more than 56% of the classes we observed at least 80% compression ratio. Here you can see the top 5 classes with the highest compression ratio. As you can see in the table, the S sub O shows the size of the original test suite in terms of lines of code, and S sub P shows the size of the parameterized test suite. For instance, email validator as a class under test has 96.08% compression ratio. Here we have the distribution of compression ratio over different classes under test chart. And as it is shown, 56% of classes have at least 80% compression. Furthermore, the proposed technique has been able to provide an average applicability ratio of 75%. For the sake of brevity, like before, we only show the top 5 classes with the most applicability ratio in the next slide. As the evaluation demonstrated, the highest applicability ratio was 100%, the lowest applicability ratio was 15%, and in more than 62% of the classes, we observed at least 80% applicability ratio. Here you can see the top 5 classes with the highest applicability ratio. As you can see in the table, the N sub T shows the number of test cases, and N sub TC shows the number of test clones. For example, here, primes as a class under test has 100% applicability ratio. And here we have the distribution of applicability ratio over different classes under test chart. And as it is shown, 62% of classes have at least 80% applicability. Also, the proposed technique converted 408,000 test clones into 23,000 parameterized test suites in about 7.5 hours. And for the sake of brevity, we only show the top 5 classes with the lowest and the highest execution time in the next slides. As the evaluation demonstrated, the lowest execution time was 600 milliseconds, the highest execution time was 54.50 minutes, and the average was 1.17 seconds. Here you can see the top 5 classes with the lowest execution time. As you can see in the table, the TS shows the size of the original test suites and T sub P shows the execution time of the proposed technique. For example, primes as a class under test has the lowest execution time, which is 0.01. In contrast with the previous slide, here you can see the top 5 classes with the highest execution time. For example, case utils as a class under test takes 54.50 minutes, and it is because of its number of test cases. To sum up, a fully automated technique has been introduced, which takes unit test suites as its input and compresses the given test suites by converting their similar tests to parameterized tests. And it has been implemented as a plugin for IntelliJ IDEA. The evaluation results confirmed improvements in readability, understandability, and maintainability of the test suites. And we believe our tool can significantly help the testers and developers. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you.